Hello everyone, and welcome to today's ISCRR Learning Webinar Series. My name is Professor Sarah Anderson and I'm the Director of ISCRR. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting and we work and live, the Warrawong, the Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge a continuing connection to land, sea, community and culture that goes back more than 100,000 years. I'd like to extend this acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the land where you work and live. And if you would like, please feel free to make an acknowledgement in the chat. For those of you who are new to our webinars, ISCRR is a unique partnership between Monash University and WorkSafe Victoria. Over the past 15 years, we've had the pleasure of working with world-leading researchers in the field of workplace health and safety. Today, we're hosting the session, Safe Journeys, Safe Workers, the Future of Workplace Road Safety. And our panel includes 3 speakers. Our first speaker, Dr Sjaan Koppel, is an Associate Professor at the Monash University Accident Research Centre, or MUARC, where she leads the Behavioural Science team. She specialises in work-related driver safety and is the academic lead for the National Road Safety Partnership Program. Jerome Carslake is the Director of the National Road Safety Partnership Program, which is delivered through MUARC at Monash University. He brings a deep expertise in workplace road safety and chairs the Construction, Logistics and Community Safety Australia Steering Group. Tahlee Norton, our third speaker, is a road safety project manager at the Transport Accident Commission and has over a decade of experience where she works on initiatives to reduce road trauma and improve safety for all road users in Victoria. A little bit of housekeeping. So this session will be recorded and will be available to view on ISCRR's channels in the future. There is an opportunity to post questions using the Zoom Q&A function as we go along, and there will be a Q&A session at the end. However, we have had a large number of pre-submitted questions come in, and so we will attempt to, but we may not make it to all questions that are submitted. So to start the session off, I'd like to invite our speakers to pop up onto the screen, and thanks, Sjaan. And really talk about the fact that in 2024, Safe Work Australia reported that vehicle incidents continue to account for the largest proportion of worker fatalities. So about 42% of all fatalities, which is 84 in that year. Vehicle incidents include incidents where an occupant of a vehicle is killed following a collision with another vehicle or stationary objects. So vehicles can include road vehicles like cars and trucks, but also machines such as aircraft, boats, loaders, tractors, and quad bikes. So our first little question for today, and some of you may not have experienced these as our webinars, but we decided it's lunchtime and we don't want people to drift off, would be to answer an audience poll, which will pop up, about what do you think is the biggest cause of work-related driving incidents? So do you think it's fatigue, speeding, so distraction, might be phone use, yelling at a child, eating a sandwich, a vehicle condition, or something else? So you can pop them in. We will see the answer shortly and we will have a quick discussion about them. Just waiting for those answers to come in. Okay, so we have 40% of participants thinking fatigue, 10% think speeding, 45% think distraction, 2 vehicle condition and 3 others. So I am going to ask the panel in the order I introduced them, so Sjaan first, then Jerome and then Tahlee, what their thoughts on that are.
So I actually think it's all of them. Unfortunately, what we see in road safety generally, but also in workplace road safety, is that fatigue can lead to distraction, can lead to speeding. So I personally think that it's all of them, but I'm keen to hear what the other panelists say.
Jerome, do you want to go next?
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with Sjaan. And sometimes also the one around vehicle conditions and vehicle type can also be even more problematic. So if someone does get tired and going along, they might begin fidgeting and exploring the car when they're looking for things to look for stimulation where they're going along. It's probably not the best time when you're driving, but if someone hasn't been onboarded and explained all the elements in the vehicle and how to use it, curiosity can get worse when you get tired.
Tahlee?
Yeah, I'd probably agree with you. If thinking backwards, if you took one of these out, you'd still have an issue. So they're all sort of equally weighted in terms of, um, fatigue, speeding. But I think, yeah, fatigue is a pretty big issue across the board and not one that we can maybe measure as well as we'd like to. And it obviously varies from person to person as well.
Thank you. So I think your answer there is it's always multifactorial. Always help when you have to click a box, but yes. So the next part of this discussion really is around the current state of workplace road safety. I'm going to ask Tahlee to have
Sure.
a short chat to us about the current state.
Yeah, of course. So I'll just share my slide there. In terms of current state, we're at the TAC, we're new to looking at the vehicle as a workplace. So I thought today it would be a good opportunity to talk about a pilot program that we've been running over the last 12 months that sort of targets a specific industry of vulnerable road users to help increase road safety in a workplace context. So it was probably a couple of years ago now, we've identified a group of young people. Obviously, P1 and P2 drivers are constantly overrepresented within road trauma statistics, so that 18 to 25-year-old group, particularly young males. So then when we sort of peeled that back a bit, we kind of identified that there's a subgroup within there that young men that leave, that go into trade sort of occupations, potentially have left school early, so missing road safety messaging along the way. They're getting their licenses early. They've got high exposure because they're driving around for work all the time, and they're potentially driving, unsafe, or not unsafe, but unfamiliar vehicles like vans and towing trailers and things like that. So the concept that we came up with to sort of pilot and test to see where we could go with this was the Work Smart, Drive Smart program. So the program in its current state exists for P1 and P2 drivers that work in construction trades. So at the moment, we've particularly targeted those trades just because it was easy to group the type of work that they did and the topics to them. So we've come to that during our research. We did some focus groups with apprentices, and we talked to them about what are the road safety issues that they were facing when they were on the road. There was a lot of key concerns about driving really long distances when they're fatigued. So getting up early and driving, an hour or plus to site, working a physical job and then driving home again. Driving unfamiliar vehicles. So, you might be just fresh on your P plates and then you get a work van to drive and you've never driven one of those before. Driving and carrying heavy loads, so new trailers, tools, all those sort of things. And what we found was that there was this sort of real shift between the size of the workplace and if they've even been spoken to around road safety as a topic of something that they need to be mindful of. So we kind of focused in on, well, how do we build resilience or refusal skills for these young people? So they might be first-year apprentice, their boss is asking them to drive and pick up 2 or 3 other apprentices, which is breaching their P license. They're driving tired. We had some really awful stories within the research around the expectations that bosses put on these young people. So we focused the content around to address those specific themes that came up within the research. So the first half of the program is really theoretical. So it kind of looks at road safety topics like distraction, speed and stopping distances, drug and drink driving, and fatigue. And then the second half is a really practical demonstration around how to safely pack a vehicle, how you tie things down, what are the road laws and regulations around that. What we did find that, particularly with carpenters, I don't know if it's with everyone, but that tying down process was almost like folklore. So there was no standard procedure or, guide that they could go to. It's just this boss taught me, so then I taught this person, and that kind of thing. So we recruited some help from the heavy vehicle industry to help us shape the program. So obviously we're not just making it up as we go along. We did get that fact checked. So the program's been running now for 12 months. We've got a delivery partner on board to help us with that. And we've had, in that 12 months, I just wrote that down this morning, we've had 625 apprentices go through the program. So we particularly want first year apprentices when they're really a novice driver on their red Ps. Sometimes they might be a bit, second year or third year, depending on how young they were when they started their apprenticeship. At the moment, it's 45% carpenters, 21% electricians and plumbers, and the typical age range, 57%, was 16 to 19. So we're really targeting them at their early career so that they can learn these things up front to then talk about at work or have the skills to sort of push back on a boss that's asking them to do unsafe behaviour. And we're kind of hoping that, as well as the road safety benefit, it might help them to band together to refuse other unsafe work practices or things like that. We got 55.5, an evaluation agency, to run a bit of a process evaluation and just measure things as we were going along with the pilot. And we've noticed really significant uplift in knowledge around particularly the laws and regulations around carrying loads and trailers, legal responsibilities when you're driving for work, packing and restraining loads on vehicles and trailers, safety features, how to check your vehicle is safe, and demerit points and fines. So the ultimate goal with this is it's sort of our first foray into a specific workplace program per se, apart from the work that we've done with, the heavy vehicle industry, to see where we can go with this. There's the ability to scale up and into different industries if there's, the appetite to do so. We're engaging with TAFEs at the moment. In particular, Swinburne have picked it up and have run a pilot within a pilot where they've put Work Smart, Drive Smart as part of their OH&S unit for all trades. So that's a really good outcome for us. So yeah, I think it works. It sat with me because I work in the remit of young drivers, and obviously with this demographic, it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. But I think as we go through today's presentations, starting with this one at the top, you'll kind of see how it flows into each other. So I might hand over to Sjaan now.
Okay. Thanks, Tahlee. Yeah, and I'm really excited to hear about that. And I think that we had a pre-meeting yesterday, and we're talking so much because we're doing so much stuff together. So I want to talk to you really briefly about a 2-year program of research that we did at MUARC, looking at improving workplace road safety culture for both light vehicle users in traditional and gig economy workforces. I really want to thank my co-authors for their assistance on this, and I want to acknowledge that the research was funded through MUARC's Baseline Road Safety Research Program. Okay, so the Australian government has recognised that the development of a positive road safety culture is really important for achieving a safer road system. What is a safety culture, you might say? Well, a safety culture refers to shared attitudes, beliefs, and values within an organisation regarding safety. And according to Reason, a strong safety culture is characterised by 4 key elements. A reporting culture, which encourages open reporting of incidents, near misses, and safety concerns without fear of blame. A just culture, so setting clear expectations around acceptable and unacceptable behaviour, promoting accountability without punishment. A learning culture, so using past experiences to drive continuous learning and improvements in safety practices. And then finally, a flexible culture, so adapting safety processes and behaviours in response to emerging risks and operational changes. And according to Reason, a mature safety culture seamlessly integrates all 4 of those elements to foster a proactive, resilient, and continuously improving approach to safety. So, as I said before, the Baseline Road Safety Research Program commissioned MUARC to undertake research aimed at identifying best practice in workplace road safety culture, as well as identifying interventions to address barriers and leverage facilitators for improving safety among workplace drivers and riders. So this included individuals operating light vehicles as part of their work tasks, as well as independent contractors and on-demand workers within the gig economy. Oh. So the research was conducted across 4 key phases: an in-depth literature review, a legislative analysis, industry engagement with both leaders and managers, as well as drivers and riders, and then a synthesis of the findings to propose actionable interventions for enhancing workplace road safety culture. So overall, the research highlights that workplace road safety culture is not solely an individual responsibility. Really, it's shaped by organisational policies, regulatory frameworks, and workplace structures. So we had 3 key insights. Firstly, we need to extend safety culture beyond the individual. So in both traditional employment and gig economy contexts, organisational structures and policies play a critical role in shaping behaviours. Secondly, we need to adapt safety principles for gig work. So even without formal employer or employee relationships, gig workers can benefit from the application of key safety culture principles, including learning, just and reporting cultures. And then finally, employer responsibility. So organisations must not place the burden of road safety solely on drivers and riders. They have a duty to actively foster a safety-conscious environment through supportive structures and practices. So in terms of the key findings on how safety culture principles can influence workplace road safety, we identified that we need to clearly define expectations for safe driving and riding behaviours, because it's essential in embedding road safety within organisational interventions. We need training, initiatives and feedback mechanisms that can capture and learn from driver and rider experiences, which can strengthen safety outcomes in both the light commercial sector and the gig economy. And while traditional sectors have greater capacity to collect and act on safety data, challenges remain in reliably gathering information from gig workers, especially if they're operating across multiple platforms. And then finally, independent contractors can often face barriers in adapting to new risks, accessing appropriate equipment, or keeping pace with the regulatory changes without adequate organisational support. So the research identified several interventions to strengthen workplace road safety culture. So the first relates to leadership and accountability. So organisations must empower managers and leaders to drive a strong workplace road safety culture by modelling safe behaviours, implementing clear policies, and ensuring consistent enforcement. Secondly, we need employee training and awareness that is related to safety and that builds on drivers' and riders' skills, reinforces safe behaviours and promotes adherence to organisational policies. Thirdly, we need a shared responsibility. So while individual safe driving and riding is essential and required, organisations must avoid overburdening employees with responsibility. They must fulfil their duty of care by creating and maintaining a safe work environment. And then finally, in terms of policy and evaluation and improvement, organisations need to regularly review and update their workplace road safety policies to ensure their relevance, effectiveness, and continuous improvement. I've raced through that. Here's the QR code for the report, or if you would like me to, I'm happy to send the report to you via email. Thank you.
Thanks, Sjaan. And yes, if you'd like a copy of that report, please feel free to reach out and we can pass that information through. The next question is sort of to Jerome, and it's sort of moving on to looking at sort of technology and innovation in road safety. And so the question for you is sort of how are businesses using telematics, AI, vehicle safety technologies to improve driver safety? And can you share a case study of a company that might be successfully implementing these technologies?
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's interesting, I guess. I guess one of the angles we always sort of look at, what's sort of emerged really strongly, because there's what 50, 60 plus case studies on our website, and a lot of them delve into the technology angle. And I guess And we also did a paper, a Q&A and discussion paper all around introducing technology. I guess one of the key things always come back to is always think about, well, what's the problem you're trying to solve? So what's the issue that's emerged, you identified, that you're then looking to search for the technology to fill that solution, and then what's the evidence behind whether that technology is going to go through. And anything you introduce is going to be going around a change management approach, because if something just pops up and you just spring it on your workers and they haven't had any buy-in or say or to how it's going to work, you're setting yourself up to fail very clearly. I think the key thing is when you do it, understanding the problem. So it's going through explaining to the workers why you're doing it, why you're touching on it, involving them in the process, helping them select it and test it and trial it and work through the teeth. Because if you don't, I think there's an example, one case study where there's an ivory tower moment where management installed something, this is great, and it worked well. But then when you had a chat with the worker, they said, well, what do you think? It's great, but we're not looking, I'll never use it. So then it can be a really expensive sort of learning. And it comes down to, are you doing it for compliance, or are you doing it for around a safety culture approach? So if it's compliance and you're ticking the box, once again, you're probably going to struggle with a lot of it. It might be fatigue technology, for example. If you're putting in some of the technology after the fact, or speeding is another one, you're putting telematics in for that. And because you know you've got a speeding problem, you're only going to have a bigger problem once the data starts pouring in. So, and we did a webinar just the other week with a company called Osmos. And I think what came out from them is they were an absolute rock star in how they did it. So as the managing director, CEO, he did a webinar with us, he spoke about it. And their workers are doing 10-day sort of swings, they're out and about. And I think you know you've succeeded when your workers become a champion for your own policies and why you have things in place. And that to me is what success looks like. And it should never be a push principle. If you're doing it right and the workers are pulling it through, they get the buy into it. They're understanding why you've got that sort of going into place. Because the other thing is there is a simple thing. There's no silver bullet. You may think you can find one, but there is none. It's around a systems sort of approach and understanding and testing, trialing what your situation is, what's fit for purpose, what makes life easy for your workers and your workers buy into.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jerome. So I think we're going to ask everyone in the audience now a bit of another poll around, does your workplace currently use any vehicle safety technology? I think it'd be nice to know if it was that systems level or more silver bullet, but be good to know. So if you can respond whether you use it extensively, a little bit, thinking about it, don't plan to, or don't know if it's actually there or not. So we'll give everyone a minute to have a vote, to put down your sandwich and your coffee. We'll just wait for those results to pop up. I think we need some more elevator music here, like we have at the start. And so those results pop up. Interesting. So we've got 90% extensively, 90% limited, 12 no, 20 no and don't plan to, and 31% unsure. So interested in any of the panel's reactions to those responses?
It doesn't surprise me at all. I think you see an entire mix and different sort of approaches on how companies and groups are applying things. And some of it might be around the size of businesses. Some of it might be contractual requirements as well. I think if you can build them in, but I also know if you get the contract requirements wrong, it can be sort of pointless as well.
Anyone else?
I think too, something we discussed yesterday, and Jerome could probably talk to this a bit better, is that increasingly organisations are going away from having their own company vehicles to grey fleet. So that means that you use your own private vehicle, but for work-related tasks. And so that will be interesting in the future going forward in terms of what are the requirements that organisations can put into your private vehicle. Jerome, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that in terms of grey fleet.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. So with grey fleet, for those of you who don't know what grey fleet is, it's when the vehicle's used for work-related purposes that isn't owned by the organisation. So as a lot of companies are trying to reduce costs or emissions and those sort of components, they're sort of pushing away or moving away from traditional fleet and seeking to get their workers to use it. but you still have the same duty of care to provide a safe workplace to them, but you no longer have the same controls as it's not your sort of vehicle. So you've got to work this fine balance as to what you can ask and check and how you're going through that sort of path. But if you're generating a transport task, and there are some apps as well. I know there's a few of them have ones where they're going through and they're trying to coach and work with the drivers in the vehicle in these sort of circumstances. And I think they're very much, it's more of a coaching behavior and trying to do journey management. We're going to A and B, measuring and providing them. But it's also around how you actually streamline and make it as simple and easy for a business to record and collect that data as well.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks. So we'll move on to the next sort of key area, which is around employer responsibility in creating a safety culture. And I think it ties into that grey fleet question around where the workplace is and isn't. So I think my first question really to Tahlee is around what legal responsibilities do employers have regarding workplace driving safety?
I think from our perspective, like any workplace, there's a legal requirement for employers to provide a safe workplace. So I guess from a TAC point of view, if the vehicle is, driving for work is a key component of the job, then getting employers' minds to switch around to the vehicle is the workplace, and what what that means for them then is providing a safe workplace in that regard. Which obviously does link back to what Jerome was saying about the grey fleet.
Yeah. So Jerome, I think to you what are some practical steps that businesses could take to improve workplace driving policies and safety?
I think a big one is I think you should establish a driving community, because it's not just a responsibility of managers or the fleet manager or that sort of components, or it's not lumped with one single individual. You think there's a whole sort of community that sort of sits in that, and it should be held and should be responsible for it. So it should be a real collaborative sort of approach to building and designing. That's if you're a big business. If you're a small business, you can be quite nice and agile, and you can you might have two drivers, have a bit of a chat, and you can pull it together nice, quick and easy, and just say, look, I care about you guys on the road. And I think the key thing is a lot of people who are out and about, they're the ones generating revenue and money. They're the ones who are creating the business and ensuring it actually lives. And I remember in the Osmos one, that's what the CEO, managing director made the point. He goes, we need those people safe, becoming comfortable, excellent at their job, and this is what we need to do to keep them safe while they're out there. So I think key thing is having a policy, being very clear as to what's good behavior, what's expected. It's like if you drive, say, 10, 15 hours a week, or maybe more than that, what's the KPIs that sit around that, for example? Because you measure everything else in business. So the key thing is mapping out your expectations, what's good, what's bad behavior, but also pushing back into the organization, that making sure the managers and the work program, the demands on the drivers, taking all those sort of elements into account. Have they got fatigue breaks? Is the schedule realistic? What happens if something goes wrong? Who's checking in to make sure? Is the vehicle fit for purpose? And if it's grey fleet, is it actually properly insured, for example? Is it properly maintained? Does the driver have a license? These are sort of the real sort of simple one-on-ones element, because, and a lot of it we assume, and does the person have the right skills for the job in driving as well? And I think you need to go through and check all those sort of simple elements in there, because it's the number one cause of work-related injuries and fatalities.
Yeah. I think, Sjaan, question to you would be, what challenges do business face when trying to implement road safety initiatives?
What challenges don't they have?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this question. I was thinking, well, firstly, limited resources, whether that be time, staffing, funding, competing priorities. So road safety might not be a high priority compared to other things like productivity, cultural resistance, insufficient leadership, or mainly, I think, poor integration of road safety, so it's not embedded in other health or safety or risk systems.
Okay, thanks. I think we've got another audience poll question, which is, if you could introduce one workplace road safety policy in your organisation today, what would it be? So that poll's going to pop up and we'll read a few of them. So once the poll pops up, I could sing some elevator music, but that's not going to keep anyone here, I promise.
Sarah, this is just for people to type into the chat.
Yeah, There we go. That's why the poll's not popping up. So if you want to go to the chat, which is down the bottom in the middle, feel free to jump on and type in one road safety initiative that you think you could implement today or would like to implement today. And it might be that everyone is so mid-lunch that we might leave that one and move on.
The chat's not open, I think, Sarah. You think you've opened up the
That
chat?
might be our problem. I was looking, whereas there are some comments in our, the chat is disabled. So that's going to make it very hard for people. So let's leave that one and we will move on. But we'll see if anyone wants to, if people do want to post them and pop them in the chat, we can, in the Q&A, we can pop them up later. So I think then what we're going to do is actually move on to, there are some popping up, so we'll let them pop up over the time when we ask some of these questions and come back to them. So the next really, we've got a bunch of pre-submitted questions that are coming in. And so the first sort of few questions we've got are around governance in transport safety and AI. So AI and governance. So the first question to the panel is, what are the key governance challenges in using AI for workplace and road safety? So particularly around data privacy, surveillance, and the unintended harms. Who'd like to answer that one?
Well, I think when we talked about this yesterday, we all sort of got a bit scared of this question, just in terms of there's increasing AI everywhere. And I think it's going to be used increasingly so. How organisations deal with that in terms of privacy and data security, I'll be really interested to see how that goes. Jerome, you had some thoughts yesterday. Did you want to add?
All right, geez, that's dropping me in the AI. I guess we'll keep seeing it sort of, emerge as it sort of comes in. And I guess it depends. It's like the driverless vehicles and those sort of components. I guess everyone might be looking at it as the pioneer of what can be sort of done and scanning it. But the risk also is, if you've got things scanning and looking at data, you've got to remember every driver is different and unique. So if you're just scanning and looking for outliers or elements like that, you've got to really focus in on the individuals a little bit, because you might have someone who's an excellent driver, like there was a comment in there around defensive drive and things like this. There might be someone who is so above beyond all the others that they're just checking the balances all the time through, and they're not getting picked up, and there might be an irregularity coming in that you haven't sort of noticed. So I'm keen to see where AI sort of goes, what the opportunity is. There's a massive amount of data going in, but it's also hard on, especially with some of the scanning of people in vehicles and elements like that. There might be some false positives, and there might be some triggers coming through that aren't actually accurate, that can sort of create some complacency as well, both in basically the driver and probably in the organisation.
I think we talked too about unintended consequences. So even within the vehicle itself, going from level 3 to level 4, where we've got some self-driving, we need to remember that there's still a human there. And as a human, we have an appetite for risk. It's called risk homeostasis. So if we feel pretty safe, we're going to engage in riskier behaviours. So we're not going to be concentrating on the road. We're going to be engaging in other activities like watching movies or all that kind of stuff. And so then if the system fails, we won't be in a position to take back over control. So I think it's called vehicle fallback. So we're going to have to change the way that we teach people to drive, because it will sort of go from driving to sort of monitoring, where we're teaching people how to monitor the system and make sure that we're still safe. And we're nowhere near that in terms of how we're teaching people to drive at the moment. So there needs to be a lot of things that are happening in order to get us to that state. In terms of workplaces, I mean, what we're seeing at the moment, not just the move to grey fleet, but also gig economy. We talked yesterday about how AI is effectively managing the safety risks of its drivers. So when we had the key interviews for our research program, we couldn't find really anyone in the gig sector to talk about, well, what are the safety procedures that you follow? we had all of those people within the light vehicle sector, but so AI is managing the work tasks for the gig economy. And so we really need to be making sure that someone, a human, is overseeing that and making sure that they're not being asked to work beyond their human capability.
And I'll just Sarah, quickly on that, like there's the point in the questions around tech is good, modern trucks and farm vehicles. And I think I touched on this earlier. Like I think the interesting with the farming environment, it's like a good lead, I think, into general environment. I shared this yesterday. Like I'm from the land originally. I've driven some of that technology, and I must admit that turned me off wanting to be a farmer because it's mind-numbing. And the thought of reading a book, getting lost in a book, I would do that very easily. I'd be driving to all sort of things that the truck was, or header, or the boom spray, or whatever it is with the technology was doing. And I struggle with that sort of stuff. So I do wonder, like what Sjaan was saying, if you've got these high-level vehicles, how can you move back and forth and keep your focus? Because one of the things on the farm is you've got to have the straightest lines. Otherwise, the old man will clip you behind the ear because you've got to wobble in it. The neighbours will see it. So.
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting point around, I think that the AI, the augmented decision making or the decision making happening, and data privacy is, it's an AI risk across workplace in general that needs to be managed, and I think the car is another workplace in that sense. So it'll be interesting to see how that is implemented over the next few years. So I think the next part of this question really is around how should regulators approach the use of and the oversight of AI systems in transport and the OH&S context. So I'm going to open it up if anyone has any thoughts on that one.
I guess there's some components I know over in the UK, chatting with National Highways and things like they're building in there, like they have a big camera unit through the UK over there. And they'll be interlinked through trucks and brakes and those sort of components and making sure that they're taking their allocated fatigue management times and they're doing those sort of things. So there are where they're going through, but I've always thought if you can create a stronger culture, so drivers are doing the right thing, they're doing those sort of elements, that's always a far more proactive way than a compliance-based culture. There will always be those outliers. So it's around, I guess, from a rare, but I would also say that from in the light vehicle space and the grey fleet, it'd be just great to see the regulators sort of focus on the vehicle as a workplace in a first sense, whereas in the heavy vehicle sector they do, and that's why I think a lot of the directors and people care more around the heavy vehicles as a result.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and I think I think regulatory systems in general at the moment are still looking at how AI is going to be used or can be used or will be used, and there'll be some test cases that'll come out, and I think that'll help define some of what we do. But AI being oversight and allowing blame to be apportioned or not apportioned is one of the interesting things. So if you've got an AI-driven vehicle and a person overcorrects or makes an error, who's at fault there? So I think that's the future and the discussion for beyond here. The next sort of area the questions sort of came together is really around fatigue and then health and worker wellbeing. And so the first question is really around what technologies or upstream systems are being explored to understand how work design impacts worker fatigue and then the sort of the consequence long-term risks of on the road.
I guess some of the stuff that's sort of interesting at the moment in Europe is that driving monitoring systems are now mandated in vehicles. So I think that's where Australia will eventually get to. We talked yesterday about the age of our fleet and how slow or how quickly some of these things will penetrate into our fleet. I definitely think that we can't just rely on the vehicle though. We have to still rely on the human. I guess that's what the safe system comes down to. And we still need to rely, to Tahlee's point about organisational policies and making sure that we're not putting workers in a position where we're asking them to do something that's putting them at risk. So I guess that's what I would say. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Tahlee.
I was just sort of thinking about it, but driving fatigued is not just it's a road safety issue that's not just specific to the workplace as well, and it's difficult in terms of messaging because, if the people that work the longest out, well, that's a general thing to say. I'll rephrase that. But there's a lot of people that are working really long hours in really tough jobs. And to say, to have a purist message of you can't drive if you've not had this much sleep or whatever it might be, isn't really fair. So I think it's around the calls to action for the individuals to self-manage fatigue where possible, obviously, but then also kind of employees turning their head, exactly what Sjaan said, to respecting that the vehicle is a workplace too, and having a bit more of a holistic look at the person and what's going on for them before they're stepping into the car. I mean, I don't have a purist answer, like I don't have a pure and simple answer for you, but that would be my assumption.
I think if there was a pure and simple answer, we'd probably have it. So I'm not sure it
You would
exists.
need it.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think the next question really is around how can we better integrate health considerations into road safety? So I think really to help workers function safely over time.
It kind of comes back to that. I found with our small cohort that the size of the organisation obviously had a really big impact on that. So if the person came from a really good, a really not good, but a big company that had, a fairly sizable people and culture unit, or there may be a work on unionised sites, there was a stark difference between their experience of driving for work than somebody who was an apprentice with just, the apprentice and the business owner, for example. So I think maybe necessarily having it as a formalized policy, but what Jerome was saying before about having a conversation with your workers around, well, we care about you. What do you think you need in terms of trying to keep yourself safe? I think that would be a good start.
I think, Tahlee, that's a really good point, because I think that's the difference between, are you doing a policy where you just tick the flick and it sits on over there, or are you actually buying in your workers and getting them to understand and they take part of it? And look, even big companies, like we did a toolbox talk a while ago with Innovation Group, and the reason it came about was this fellow from there went in to meet with a C-SPAN of an organisation. And he sat in the waiting room. He was looking out, and he said 228 days without an incident. He's like, interesting. Goes in, meets with the C-SPAN. He's sitting there, and they're all. He goes, oh, by the way, bravo for the 228 days without an incident. And they're all high-fiving. And he goes, I guess you're wondering why I'm here. And they all sat there, and the CEO said, yeah, we do wonder what makes you so important to come in to meet us. And he sat there and goes, well, I'm here because 20 days ago you had a major incident where one of your workers was injured driving a vehicle. And basically said the COO run out and pulled down the thing, and they had a chat, and they discovered the vehicle as a workplace is not captured as a measure. So the whole reason behind it. And it comes down to what you're measuring and looking for. If you don't even understand the vehicle as part, it's out of sight, out of mind. The focus is on the factory floor, the focus is on construction, the site, the buildings. But when a worker gets in their vehicle and goes out the door, is there support? And you think about the pressures, the important, like there might be something might have gone wrong. The other part is, and this is where Sjaan's fantastic on this stuff, is when you get in the vehicle, unfortunately, you don't leave behind everything that's been going on in your day, personal and professional. You get in the vehicle, and then in that moment, you're on your own. You have the chance to ruminate, and what was maybe a little molehill becomes a mountain in your mind during the day. And if you're tired, it gets even worse. Other pressures go through. So these are all the complexities you have to be cognizant of the people who drive for work.
And I think it all comes. I think it all comes down to that we all underestimate the risks of driving. We underrate the risks of driving while fatigued. Increasingly, we're seeing that people are underestimating the risks of not wearing their seatbelt. So it's about us remembering that not only is the vehicle the workplace, but that it can be a risky workplace. And so we need to make sure that we take those mitigation strategies. Just coming back to your question, Sarah, about how we can integrate health considerations, I guess it comes back to that reporting culture. And I've seen this done well in small and big organizations, but it does depend on the culture. If you can go in there and say, listen, I've got sleep apnea at the moment, or I've got a sleep problem, or I've got a health problem, and so I need to change my work duties. People who are receptive to that and can be flexible in terms of moving them on to different things. And sometimes that comes down to money and budget and availability. But if people feel that they can report that, they still want to come to work, they still want to contribute, but they can't do some of those tasks, then you do find that when they report, then they're equally as productive in other roles. Now, that's really easy to say, not always easy to do, but it does come back to that. Okay, we have a culture where we really prioritize safety out on the road. I might not be safe at the moment, so I need to tell someone and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there's a really interesting comment in the questions from Jane, who also talks about the choice of vehicles. So in terms of work health, some people are sitting in vehicles for more than 10 hours a day, and she sort of talked about the size of the seat, leg room, ability to adjust for comfort and getting in and out. So taking the fatigue mental aspect of it, but actually, we know that mental and physical injuries are entirely linked. And so actually ensuring that we can reduce the physical sort of long-term effects of sitting. Any comments on that one?
Well, absolutely. Like at Monash here, we have to do like an ergonomic check to make sure that our seat and everything is set up. It's part of our My Plan, like we have to do that compliance. And so I think personally, if you are in a vehicle for that period of time, then there needs to be that as well. But again, it comes down to how much people are buying into that and what priority they put on that. And I think personally it should be a high priority, because I think mental and physical health are so inextricably linked that that should be a consideration. But for some companies, it's not possible.
I think you're right. It's very, especially in pool vehicles, things moving around, but personal vehicles, there's great examples of some of the leading companies, especially for heavy vehicle drivers, they nuance the vehicle for the driver. So they recognize that it's their office, it's their space, and they make it very specific. So maybe they have some limitations, mobility, element like that. And the reason being, you got to retain the good drivers. If you want to sit there and be in the business, you want to keep them in there. So you need to respect them and look after them. And I think, but then if you get back into some of the life goals, because also how you sit in position, that can also have a big impact on visibility, what you can see around you. Have you been set up? Do you actually understand the vehicle? And I think a lot of people just need to understand, even before you head out, have you actually set up your vehicle before you go as part of your pre-start check? Because it's not something you want to do when you're driving. Even worse, if you're driving, is if you are using Apple Play or other sort of components, or even air conditioning elements, all the one-on-ones. People think it's around the safety technology, but there's also just the one-on-ones in the modern car. A hire car, you get a Tesla, something like this, you may have no idea how to operate this thing. And next thing you're off driving in it, and chances are you're getting it and you're away, and then you go, holy crap, how does this work?
And I think, Jerome, there's a question in the chat, which I think just links really closely to that one, which I'm going to pop in and break the rules. But it's around the newer vehicles coming with really big screens and manufacturers having all that control within the screen. So you might operate your aircon and your radio and your phone and your seat position all from the screen. And in terms of that, how we can approach that sort of screen distraction. Someone later on says, there's a book in it because all screens are unsafe, which is probably true. But actually, how the government's actually approving launch of these vehicles, but there's a pretty big distraction factor there.
I remember Mike Regan used to advocate for an extra star that used to go in ANCAP on those human factors on the vehicle. And because it's all about making the machine look as sleek as possible instead of looking into what's the human factors element. And one of the positives of some of this technology coming in, I remember when the in-vehicle camera systems were rolling out in the early days, this major transport company discovered, as a result of what they were seeing, is they lost a few trucks because you're driving the truck as you're going along, so you're like this. And to change the channel, you got to lean right across into where the radio, to where the stereo was set up, because it wasn't on the steering wheel. And so when they showed the evidence, they went back to the OEM and they went, your design of this truck, we want everything on the steering wheel, like the European sort of ones. And I think there's ways to begin thinking about it. Otherwise, you create the risk for the driver.
Yeah.
I think from a behavioural and an organisational point of view, though, it's about that pre-journey check. So trying to make sure that before you get into the vehicle that you've set everything up so that you don't need to engage with some of those things, or that you have experience or you've tested or checked how to engage with those things for as brief amount of time as possible. As a behaviouralist, we don't want people's eyes off the road. We want people's eyes on the road, and we don't want them to be, even if it's a massive screen, we don't want them to be focused on trying to find the right controls on the screen. So I would be doing everything that I can before I get into the car to make sure that I know where things are so that I don't need to learn on the job while I'm driving.
Actually, and Sjaan, that just remind me one thing. So quite a few years ago, IAG they tested, I think they had like 72 or 80 vehicles rock up at Olympic Park in Sydney. And they had all these workers come in, and the workers test drove all these vehicles, had a course they go on, and they measure attitudes before and after, and they had to accomplish all these tasks. And they went through, and that's how they identify what their fleet vehicles were. They haven't done it for a long time since, but I've never seen a company go through and say, actually, identify. Sharon O'Neill ran it. And I thought it was, and the insights were fascinating. I had the pleasure of jumping in a few vehicles and learn about it. And that tested that onboarding, how the vehicle interactives are going. So that some of them get out and go, this is crap.
Yeah. I'm going to move us on because we're not going to get through all our questions. I'm just going to say that. But we never thought we were, so that's okay. But I think this one's a really key one, which is around the responsibilities employers have when they know workers are coming to a shift already fatigued. So it might be people who work split shifts or double shifts across organisations. So especially like driving in high risk environments, so driving at night or in poor weather. What do employers, or what can employers do in that sort of situation?
I think it comes back to that buy-in of safety culture and the value again. I was sort of reflecting on that question. I was thinking about a young apprentice that I spoke to that had to travel. He lived on the other side of Melbourne and had to travel up to Seymour or something like that for work. And he was driving for over 2 hours at 4 a.m. to get to work. So you kind of consider the young person's life, he's probably played footy on the weekend or sport, and he's probably, have a bit of a party lifestyle that they're already rocking up tired, then you can't expect their jobs to be fulfilled their duties to be fulfilled in the same way. So in that example, we talked about, would you feel comfortable asking for accommodation? If you're working a certain amount of distance away, from home, to think about that. So you're taking out that driving element. You've just got the actual work tiredness. I mean, but again, it comes back to the willingness and the culture that exists within the organisation. Yeah. And shifting that is not a simple thing.
And I think it's really going to come down to the sector as well. Like I'll share a webinar we did with Claire Kate. I thought it was just amazing, from Southern Cross Protection. And the really hard thing for some companies, like if there's a new Australians, people going in, they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to make money. And if you go to the gig sector as an example, I know talking with them, they base their fatigue laws, the fatigue management, on the heavy vehicle sector, but they don't have the controls in place. So I sit there going, you can't do that, because think about brakes, how do you checking all that? But you think about Southern Cross, how they've gone through trying to buy the hearts and minds and educate and engage, because they can't stop the people. They get in and say, I'm fine for work. You go, well, there's no test to measure your fatigue level before you get on the road. But they have continuously innovated to try and engage their workers, and it's very tight margins, but they use DSS each state, and they just monitor the work with each one driver, this whole process. And it's really, really hard, but I think every organisation just needs to think about, well, how can you really engage it? How can you show you care? How can you have a conversation, and try and influence people? And best thing is using evidence-based examples as well.
Yeah, to Tahlee's point, I think, we sort of want people to embrace a fit for duty sort of perspective. So are you fit for the job, or are you presenting to work in a state where you're the best version of yourself. It's easier said than done. And in terms of what you can and can't say to people in terms of what they've been doing or how much they need to have slept, or that gets really complicated in terms of privacy and all that kind of stuff. But if you can just try to encourage people to embrace that fit for duty, hopefully it trickles down.
I'm going to squeeze in one last question because we can, which is really around, and I think it probably sums up quite a few of them. What does the current research say about the most effective ways to influence safer driving behaviours?
Oh, generally, it's a tricky one. It depends on the age group, I would think. From what I've noticed across the work that I do within the TAC, obviously I'm looking at a younger demographic, and a lot of that is peer influence. A lot of it is regulatory things like the GLS that's been put in place. That's a really good control to help reduce trauma. Modeling of behavior. But then if you look to the older cohort, there's, vehicle choice, more vulnerability of the body, then there's more, likelihood of injury. So that's a very large question that I don't think I can filter, unfortunately. But I don't know if the others have any help.
I think it's when you integrate road safety, you don't think about road safety separately to work health, safety or risk management. I think you need leadership buy-in. I think you need to celebrate success and track progress, because you can't just use a stick. You have to have carrots. And I think that you need to use data to target high-risk areas. So really focusing on that risky stuff rather than people feel like they're just being monitored for no reason.
And I think once again, I'll go back to the Osmos example. I thought what was really great in that is, and I've heard this from quite a few, is people seeing their scores, so they're understanding their driver performance, and then gamification, they're nudging it, they're learning how can I get better at it. The other part to touch on, just from an organizational point of view, if you're not getting traction within your company and your organization from a safety point of view, how about you go down the ESG sort of angle and your environmental emissions, which is now a requirement to report on. So transport's one of the largest contributors of emissions. So and if you can do some eco-safe driving, might have a bit of a group, a chief or someone who might not even thought about you sitting in your organization that should be chatting with, and just how you can reduce your footprint and improve in those sort of angles and use buy-ins. So that's another sort of angle to lean on.
So on that note, on the basis that people probably have finished their lunch, I'm going to draw it to a close. I'd really like to thank all the panel members for participating and sort of sharing your insights with us today. There will be a little survey popped into the chat now, which we'd love everyone to complete. At this point, we continue to run webinars on lots of various topics, and that sort of evaluation helps us work out what the next topic is, if there's areas we need to cover. We've had so many questions and comments that have popped in here that it's probably there's probably room for like 3 or 4 more of these webinars, but we will try and compile some of those questions together and some of the documentation. So if you'd like any of that, please let us know. We will send some information out. The webinar will be recorded, or has been recorded, but the recording will be made available to all registrants in the coming week. So if you have missed that, and we'd really encourage you to explore both TAC, MUARC, and the NRSPP resources on workplace road safety. I think it's a new and emerging area that people clearly are really engaged with. And again, I'd really like to thank our panels and thank you all for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
For having us.